Hey guys, this goes out to all of the middle school, high school, and college students of OCC and anyone else who feels like they like to watch this. That's totally fine. Also, whatever your age may be and whatever your connection may or may not be with OCC, it's all good. Just wanted to reach out to you again with a video, particularly for those of you in those age categories, and kind of touch base with you here in mid-August. Last week I did a video too. I told you I was going to try to keep it a little shorter than I normally do, and I got it down to right around the 30-minute mark compared to what had been my norm, which was somewhat longer than that. I'm going to try to be even shorter and more concise today. So let's see how I do here. Really, most of what I want to chat with you about today comes down to a question that I get asked fairly often, actually, and that is, Rob, what's your favorite passage or verse in all the Bible? And of course, you all know the Bible has 66 books in it, at least our Protestant Bible. Roman Catholic versions of the Bible have even more because they have a middle section called the Apocrypha that adds some. But for those of us that are Protestants, and that includes Congregationalists, we have 66 books. And as any of you that own a Bible know, it's collectively those 66 books make for one really thick book. So there's a lot to choose from. And what's your favorite verse or even your favorite passage, your favorite little collection of verses, your favorite story or whatever? That's not an easy question necessarily to answer. But since the time when I was right around your age, since the time when I was maybe early high school, I've had a consistent favorite Bible passage. And I'll share with you today exactly what that is. And it comes from the 25th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew. Now, this past Sunday, Jeff was out of town and I preached at OCC. And I preached actually on the feeding of the 5,000 from Matthew chapter 14, not the passage I'm going to share with you today. But in the course of the sermon about the feeding of the 5,000, I did briefly mention the passage that I'm going to share with you today. And I did say to the congregation, I said, by the way, this is my very favorite passage in all the Bible. And even though everybody had masks on in the sanctuary, even under their masks, I could tell from their eyes and so forth that there were some surprised looks like, really? That's your favorite Bible passage? I don't know, maybe you'll find it surprising too, or maybe not so much. Let's get to it. So the backdrop is this. Matthew's Gospel has 28 chapters, and the last 3 or so of them are really the very tail end of Jesus' earthly life. The Last Supper is in Matthew 26. The crucifixion is in Matthew 27. You've got the resurrection in Matthew 28. So we're in Matthew 25. We're just one chapter before the Last Supper, basically. So it's pretty late in Matthew's telling of the story of Jesus. And Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's talking about when God might bring about sort of a culmination or a finale of history. When might the end of the world happen? Or how would that happen? How would God usher in the end of an era and the start of a new era? How might that happen? Sometimes this is called Judgment Day. What would Judgment Day look like when God says, all right, I'm ready to close the books on this portion of time and then move on to a new portion of time? And so as I close the books on this portion of time, I'm going to sort of take a step back and survey everything and everyone and bring things to quote unquote judgment. So this story is Jesus talking about that. And here's what it says. I'll read it for you from the New Revised Standard Version. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." And in some versions of the Bible, by the way, you may have seen it written, "As much as you did it unto one of the least of these brothers of mine," or brothers and sisters of mine, "you did it unto me." The New Revised Standard Version simply says, "one of the least of these who are members of my family." The story continues. Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, and the righteous into eternal life. Now, a lot of you know me pretty well, and you know that my theological beliefs don't really include a very strong emphasis on the danger of eternal damnation and hellfire and being judged unworthy by God and cast away to spend the rest of eternity in punishment and suffering. That's really not my understanding of God. That's really not what my theological beliefs are all about. So why then is this my favorite passage in all the Bible? Well, I think it underscores, I think it strongly illustrates just how passionately Jesus cared about the idea of caring for the least of these. Jesus put it so strongly. He laid it right out there. And he said, look, if you do something kind and loving for someone in need, hungry, thirsty, a stranger, naked, sick, in prison, if you do something kind and loving for them, you're doing it for me, for Jesus. Can you see me? Can you see the face of Jesus in the face of one who is suffering? And then he even adds more emphasis to it by the second part of the story, where he says, gosh, it's going to be like, when God comes and judges everyone, it's going to be like, you know what? You didn't do squat for people who are suffering, for people who are hungry, thirsty, naked, a stranger, sick, in prison. You did zero. And so you've really pretty much earned zero in the way of reward. Now, it's not my favorite Bible passage because of what it says about heaven and hell, about who goes to heaven and who goes to hell, and why some go to heaven and some don't, or even whether anybody goes to hell. That's not why it's my favorite passage, not at all. Couldn't be further from the truth, actually. It's my favorite passage because I take it as a teaching, as an instruction by Jesus. Hey, what should your lives be about? If you want to be my disciples, if you want to be my followers, if you want to follow me, if you want to call yourself a Christian, well, what should your life be about? Well, when there's hungry people, give them something to eat. When they're thirsty, give them something to drink. When they're strangers, welcome them. When they're sick or in prison, visit them. When they're naked, give them clothing. Basically, love God and love your neighbor, the great commandments. And how do you do that? By meeting basic human needs. When you do something to meet someone's need for food, someone's need for water, someone's need for welcoming and belonging and friendliness, someone's need for clothing, someone's need for a visit, friendship. When you do something to meet those basic human needs, you are loving God. And you're doing it by loving your neighbor. And specifically by loving your neighbor who's in need of something, your neighbor who is in some way suffering, who is in some way in need. To me, it's just such a powerful thing. I remember when I was roughly your age and I first read this story, that probably was more like middle school, and I first read this story on my own in my Bible, and it just hit me upside the head like, wow, you mean to tell me that I'm supposed to see the face of Jesus in a homeless man? I'm supposed to see the face of Jesus in a hospital patient? I'm supposed to see the face of Jesus when I'm watching television and they're talking about kids who are starving in other parts of the world? I'm supposed to see the face of Jesus on the kid in the school cafeteria who nobody really sits with at lunch? I'm supposed to see the face of Jesus in kind of the unpopular or the outcast kid? And as I read the story, the answer is yeah. Yeah. It's exactly the kind of stuff that we're supposed to be about. Now, what can you do about that today in 2020 as a young person? I mean, yes, if you have the resources at your disposal to give some money or some clothing or some food to a charity to help people who are in need, that's great. But at your age, most of you probably don't have access to a whole lot of money. But I'll tell you what, there are aspects of this story that definitely are relevant to your lives. I mean, when we talk about, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, just that one line out of the story. Think about your peers. Maybe they're in your class at school. Maybe they're in your neighborhood. Maybe they're even in your extended family, cousins and all that. But when you think about your peers and you realize that someone is sad, feelings are hurt, maybe someone had other friends of theirs turn their backs on him or her, or betray him or her. Tell a secret that they shouldn't have told. Or maybe worse yet, started a false rumor that they shouldn't have started, certainly. When you see someone who is essentially the modern day young person equivalent of a stranger, meaning someone who doesn't feel very welcome or very loved, and you have a chance to welcome them to the chair next to you, to welcome them to a brief but friendly conversation, to make them feel a little more welcome in class, or a little more welcome in the hallway, or a little more welcome in your neighborhood, on your street. That's important stuff. And Jesus is saying, yeah, see my face in the face of that kid that feels unwelcome. So that's part of why this is really my favorite Bible passage. It is so incredibly challenging. It's a challenge that is virtually impossible to fully meet all of the time. If we did everything in this passage to the max all the time, none of us would have any time to do anything else. We would all be completely broke, all of us of every age, because we would have given every bit of money and every possession we have away. It's a really high bar that Jesus is setting here. But it's a challenge we can keep coming back to moment after moment, hour after hour, day after day, and we can keep asking ourselves, wow, is there something more I can do for the least of these, for the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the prisoner? Is there something I can do? So that's why it's my favorite Bible passage in a nutshell. And by all means, feel free to send me a comment. Maybe you've got another question you'd like me to answer in some future video or some future MP3 session or whatever. Love to hear from you. Let me hit you with a couple of just 3 questions for you to ponder here as we get ready to wrap up. First, what would you say is your favorite Bible verse or passage, and why? A lot of you have encountered a lot of Bible passages. A lot of you have heard me talk about, teach about, preach about, lead discussions about all sorts of passages. Plus, you've heard passages at camp and at retreats and in sermons and online. Surely there must be one verse or one story or one passage that stands out for you as kind of the favorite biblical thing you've encountered so far in your life. And then what makes that a favorite for you? Secondly, who are the least of these in your own circle of influence? I mean, I understand that at your age, in your life situation, it's kind of hard for anyone, even for Jesus, to ask you to do a ton for refugees in Syria or for starving folks in Ethiopia. I mean, we can all do a little something. Maybe we can participate in a fundraiser or something for some of those causes, but it's hard for us to make a big difference, especially when you're young. But again, within your own circle of influence, the kids and adults that you actually interact with regularly, your family, both within your household and maybe your extended family, add in your grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., your friends, your various circles of friends, people who are teammates of yours in sports, classmates of yours in school, maybe people who are on some of the other extracurriculars that you are too, band, orchestra, Spanish club, chess club, drama, musicals, all that. Within your circle of influence, the people you actually interact with, who are the least of these? Those who are hungering for something, thirsting for something, those who may feel unwelcome. Okay, and then thirdly, how would it change things for you if you really tried to see Jesus in the faces of the least of these? If you really tried hard, the next time you saw someone that was hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, in prison, or a stranger who felt unwelcome, if you really saw the face of Jesus in their face, how would that change things for you? Now, before I sign off, I've also been getting a bunch of questions about the fall. What is happening this fall? And I want to address that, but first, a heads up. Right now, this video will be the last youth video for at least a while. Why? Well, I'm going to be taking a pretty nice chunk of vacation time starting about the middle of next week. You're watching this presumably on Sunday, August 16th, or maybe a day or two after that. Right around August 18th or 19th, I'm going to start a big chunk of vacation time that's going to go all the way through Labor Day. So it's not quite a full 3 weeks, but it's pretty darn close. It's much more than 2 weeks. I have not taken any vacation time yet in 2020. The whole digital ministry thing, where most of you, I haven't seen your faces actually since March. Instead, I've just been cranking out all kinds of video resources and having Zoom meetings like crazy with various committees, and it's all been digital. It's been a grind. I really do feel drained and kind of tapped out. So it's going to be good for me to take some time and step away before really the full pace of September hits. I'm not going to be going anywhere big. I mean, I'm staying very cautious with COVID-19. So I have no intention of getting on a plane or staying in a hotel, doing any big travel. But I sure am going to try to spend a lot of time outside. I'll be playing a lot of tennis. I'll be trying to get some exercise and some real good rest and catch up on some reading, just simple stuff, and stepping away from churchy stuff for at least a good solid 2+ weeks. Therefore, you won't be seeing another video from me at least through Labor Day and maybe longer. And that leads to the question, what about the fall? What's happening in the fall for youth at OCC? And here are some of the questions that have arisen. What about MP3 on Sundays? Is it going to happen? Is it going to be at 9 o'clock or at what? How big is it likely to be? How many kids? Social distancing, how's that going to work? So what room are we going to meet in? Are there still going to be youth videos? And when, how often, and about what? What about Zoom? Some churches are having great luck having youth group meetings, maybe on like Wednesday nights or something, on Zoom only, and playing a few games and having a little devotional and a little discussion, just, maybe 30 or 45 minutes total. Should we look into that? What about WCA youth events? I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine a safe, socially distanced overnight retreat at one of our churches. That seems unlikely. But are there events that could happen for the WCA for sort of campers? We'll see. That's being discussed. And what about tri-youth events? Remember last school year we had events that involved youth from OCC plus North Shore plus Wauwatosa. Is that doable? Do we want to do that? Are folks up for that? And can we do it socially distanced and safe? Or should those two be virtual? What about Agape Table? That's something that we've done for the last few years for mostly college-age folks at both Milwaukee and Madison. Well, what might that look like in the fall? Is there any possible way to make that happen, or could that go online? And what about community service opportunities? Is there any safe, socially distanced way to volunteer at places like Hope House or Family Sharing or anywhere else next door? Are there any alternatives to that if we want to try to do some community service? These are all questions that have not fully been answered. And so I plead with you, please, over the next week or two, say between now and the end of August, if you have ideas on any of these, if some of these things sound great and you'd like to say, Rob, I like this idea, go for it. Or if some of them sound awful and you're like, Rob, don't waste your time. Just forget about that one. I want to hear from you. If you have other ideas that aren't on this list, ways that youth from OCC and beyond can still be in fellowship with one another, even during a pandemic, I'd love to hear from you. We are still wrestling with just how to do things in the fall, once the school year begins again, in a way that is socially distanced and safe and appropriate given the circumstances. So please don't be shy. All right, now I'm looking at the computer screen and it says it just turned 26 minutes. So I did it. It is briefer than it was last week. I am on sort of a downward trend in terms of length for these videos. I guess that's something to celebrate. Folks, I hope that you're having as good a summer as you possibly can, given how weird it is. I get that. Again, don't be shy about letting me know your thoughts. And until I do see you again, may God continue to guide you and to bless you. Take care.